going on? We are back at it again with another episode of Convos with Dr. Andy, and your boy, James Gillespie. Today, we're going to be talking about the difference between active mobility and passive stretching, right? Or let's call it mobility, or flexibility versus mobility, what have you. We're going to unpack it a little bit here, but we wanted to attack this because a lot of people think, right, that that Pilates and yoga is going to make them better at Olympic weightlifting, right? That Pilates and yoga is going to make your overhead press, no matter what type of overhead press it is, go up through the roof. And while there might be some carryover, it's not really the best way to improve that mobility. So, Andy, let's kind of kick off and maybe with some definitions of the difference between the passive and active here and how we're using it so that people understand even what the hell we're saying.
Yeah. So we can break the terms down. So passive versus active. Passive being a non-muscle usage. So you can think of, instead of you raising your leg up, somebody lifts that leg up for you, right? To kind of stretch your hamstrings. Mobility versus flexibility. Flexibility is going to involve more of like the soft tissue, such as your muscles and your tendons. Some people can elicit, they can include ligaments in with that as well. Ligaments hold bones to bone. So you can think of joints. Mobility is going to be more involved with like joints. So definitely ligaments, joint capsules, which you can think of those as just kind of like buttresses around the joints to kind of make them more stable. And then any contractile tissue that's not a muscle. So like, for instance, if you're going to stretch your hamstring, which, for people that don't know what that is, it's the muscle, one of the muscles on the back part of your thigh. If you were to straighten your knee out, if you're sitting on the ground, straighten your knee and then reach for your toes, generally that's, stretching your hamstrings, the soft tissue. If you're looking at like mobility, you're looking to see like the range of a joint. So the shoulder joint, if you want to bring that up overhead fully, that's the typical range. The normal range should be about 180 degrees, right? 0 degrees down by your side, 180 degrees of joint mobility up overhead. So any less than that, there's a restriction in the person's mobility. If the joint can't move that full range, and anything more than that, that's considered hypermobility. So a little bit too much, and they probably need a little bit more stability. But yeah, so for the most part, yeah, passive. So passive stretching, right, would be as if, James, you and I are together. I would be personally moving your tissues around, stretching you without you eliciting any volitional or voluntary act. And then active mobility would be, sitting down on the bottom of a squat with an empty bar overhead and you holding it overhead. You're actively doing the work.
Yeah, that's disgusting. I don't want to do that, but I'm happy to sit at the bottom of a squat, especially my heels elevated, but I'm not trying to hold a bar over my head. You're out of your mind.
Even an empty bar, 45-pound bar?
I'm all good, dude. I'll do it, but I don't want to do it.
Wow. Okay.
I definitely don't want to be doing that. Just chilling down there, right?
Yeah.
When you're, no thanks. So I guess kind of the first place that my head goes is like, because the question that I always get is like, well, so I get that. I get the passive versus active, like someone else moving your body versus you having to voluntarily move your body. But then why does me flowing through yoga, up dog, down dog, headstand, world's greatest stretch, any of that kind of stuff where I'm actively moving, why does that not carry over to my ability with barbell movements, with gymnastics movements, with me feeling more comfortable in the bottom of a catch on rings or in the bottom of a dip? Like, why do I not see carryover there almost 1-to-1 in the way that I would think that there would be, right? Because I'm doing all this yoga or Pilates.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a good, I guess, an example or analogy to that would be, okay, you train all the muscles individually in your body. Like let's say you do, knee extensions, knee flexions, squats, deadlifts, box jumps, all that. And then you expect your running mechanics to magically get better. Right. Most people, if they've never, and again, I know this is a gross example, but like, cause everybody should learn how to run, at least when they're developing, right? It's the thing that comes after jogging, after walking. So, but if let's say, cause there's people out there that probably haven't run in years, right? As we get older, So if they automatically just get off the couch and go start running, it's going to kind of look a little bit weird at first if they haven't used it. But if you just go and train those muscles individually just to become stronger, let's say, or even get better mobility, but you don't train the actual act of running, those mechanics are going to be a little bit weird. So same thing. Like if you're just one of those that goes and does yoga or passive stretching, you mentioned some other modalities, and you don't train the actual work of an Olympic lift, like let's say snatch, right, or clean and jerk for this example, right, where you're loaded overhead and requiring a lot of stability. Your mobility and your flexibility will probably be there. However, if your neurology isn't set, and even your musculoskeletal system, if you don't have the hypertrophy to stabilize accordingly, so because your muscles got to talk to each other. Well, your muscles talk to each other, but they also talk to the brain, which then talks back to the muscles, right? And it's like organizing a big old family. If those things aren't firing appropriately and they're not trained to do so, yeah, the lift, right, in this case, for the example, the lift is going to look sloppy, or you may not feel stable. And if those muscles aren't firing in the appropriate chronological order at the appropriate rate, then yeah, that's where potential injury comes in. And it may not happen rep 1, it may not happen rep 100, but it'll catch up to you eventually.
Yeah, same reason that if all you do is, I would have to assume it's the same reason people can't do SOTS press, right? Empty bar or PVC. They can't do it at the bottom of a squat, but some of those same people can strict press 165, 175,
yeah,
and
100%.
can front squat or back squat 400 pounds. But like if you put 95 on the bar and have them sit at the very bottom and try to push it, they're like,
yeah,
can't do anything.
Yeah, you can look at it from both sides of it, right? So
Yeah.
if somebody is incredibly strong at say those powerlifting movements, right? Great squat, well, strong squatter, strong bench, strong strict press, strong deadlift, but they don't have the greatest mobility, because we all see that. Both you and I, James, you coach, I used to coach, you have probably a lot of clients that have restrictions in regards to that. I've seen a lot of that. So they have a lot of tissue integrity, but not a lot of like tissue flexibility or joint mobility. So the thing with back to like the yoga and how that might not translate, because that was kind of the buzz, not word, but just like modality that we kind of brought up. So somebody who does yoga, pretty flexible, I would say. Right? That's kind of, I would say, hot yoga. Would that be accurate, James? Is that kind of like the audience that we're addressing there with yogis?
I mean, even people that do CrossFit, right? I'm more even speaking to people that do what would be called functional fitness, quote unquote, like very loose quotes here, but then try to do yoga or Pilates in their off time to get better for CrossFit or get better for that kind of work. And it's not just yogis in general, right? Like yogis that try and pick up a bar. No, that's not who I'm talking to.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So somebody who's, doing functional fitness, right, wants to get better at a certain lift, right, and they're going to think about improving their mobility, but how come there's not a direct correlation of, I go do yoga for 6 months, right, while also doing functional fitness? Why that doesn't bring back and bring astronomical results? Yeah, I mean, for those out there that are listening to this, like, yeah, definitely, do yoga. There's nothing against, finding other modalities, like that's encouraged. But if you're somebody who's, in a CrossFit gym or just, working out, whatever, and you want to gain a little bit more mobility with moving weights, right, it's good to do both. You want to have passive stretching, because you do want to make sure that those ligaments, that when you move your body around in space, you're not necessarily trying to rely on. So when I'm doing a bicep curl, or when I'm going to a bottom of a squat, right, or getting my elbow fully extended, I still want to have my musculoskeletal system, so my muscles, engaged. So a lot of times in CrossFit, I used to teach it, I used to coach it, we would encourage, like, hey, ass to grass, right, hips below knee, so hips below parallel, and you try to go as low as you can while maintaining, what's quote unquote a neutral spine, which just, a quick cheat code, I guess, as far as knowing that there's no, a neutral spine is a range, and everyone's normal neutral spine is a little bit different. But anyway, so what you want to do when you get to end range, when you're loading your spine volitionally, is you never want to rely on passive tissues, such as your your labrums, which I'm sure, people have heard of that term before, right? The labrum, like, oh, I tore my shoulder labrum, my hip labrum. So
Most
those,
people don't know that there's two different ones, though. Most people think that they just have one labrum.
yeah. For every ball and socket joint that so the shoulders and hips, you have a labrum. So labrum just is a tissue that kind of looks like an oval ring, that sits around the joint that makes it a little bit deeper, more secure, and more stable. You don't want to rely on that tissue to be holding your body up or holding weights up. Ligaments, right? Great for holding bones together. You don't necessarily want those things to be tensile strength when you're lifting weights. So you want your muscle tissue to do the work. So when you're bottoming out in the squat, right? Snatch, clean and jerk, clean, right? And there's any form of squat, you still want to remain tense. So when you just go into a deep position and try to stretch that passively, right? For those of you guys that already are aware of this, the couch stretch, aka the Napoleon stretch, or let's see, the world's greatest stretch, or even if you just try to grab a kettlebell and sit low into a squat, right? And just really try to get as deep as you can without remaining tense, right?
Yeah. So passive. Like
So
not trying to be
passive.
active, not trying to hold, like squeeze your legs while you're doing it.
Right. Okay. Or even if you have somebody, like in this example, if you have somebody just take your knee and you're laying on your back and somebody just passively, right,
Moves
bend
it through.
as much as it can. Yeah, it's great for blood flow, right? A lot of PTs do that to help recover from injuries, right? Or they do it to just help somebody's performance eventually, because you have to run the joints through full range of motion. But it's best if you're going to load it up, it's best to do that volitionally. So if you're just trying to gain better mechanical advantage by passively stretching or passively mobilizing your joints, you're not priming your body to be ready to handle load actively. So when you and this was my problem, I believe, for the most part, was I used to just bottom out in my cleans, bottom out in my snatches, bottom out in my squats before I rebounded back up. And I was relying on a lot of tissues that were not my muscles. And so that eventually led to my low back pain. So, and I was one of those people that I was like, well, I'm tight, so I better just stretch through that, right? Passively to get myself better active. No, in order to get better actively, you have to do some active stuff, right? It's better to do both, but you can't do one or the other. Well, you can't do passive to get better at active, just like you can't do active to get better at passive.
Yeah. So almost like you should have put a barbell in the front rack or back rack and done some duck walks. Maybe put it overhead and done some duck walks. Maybe put a plate in your hands, put it overhead and sat in the bottom of that and moved, right? As opposed to just only moving that deep when you have something heavy in your hands.
Well, yeah, and even you mentioned duck walks, great exercise, right? But a lot of people bottom out, like they bounce in and out of the bottom, right? So they're using those elastic tissues that are not really meant to handle load by themselves, right?
Yeah.
And so for a great example, most of us, knock on wood, right? Well, hopefully not most of us, but probably most of us have rolled an ankle at some point.
Yes. 100%.
So what happens physiologically in the body is when your ankle goes to roll like that, the body senses that the tendon is stretching too much. Okay. And so what'll happen, in order to protect the tendon, to protect the muscle, because you need the muscles to get away from a danger. The brain's all about survival. The next second of your life, it's all about survival. When your ankle starts to roll, the tendons, and along with the muscle spindles in the muscles, will tell the brain, hey, I'm stretching too quick, too fast. So the brain will shut that muscle off. It'll inhibit it. And so then the ankle will roll more. The ligament will then take over, the ligaments. And that's when you end up with what's called a sprain. Right? And the severity of the sprains, depends, right? But a sprain is a overstretching and irritation of ligaments. So the brain will sacrifice ligaments and other non-contractile tissue to save your muscles and save your tendons. So when you constantly bottom out, and we're using this example a lot, bottom out in a squat, because I see this a lot, and this used to be me.
People get that double bounce.
You get the double, and you can double bounce, right? But again, it's all going to be, you need to do it under tension. So, but if James, you're right. If you bottom out, double bounce, all that stuff, 1.25 squat, let everything get loose and then re-engage. All you're doing is you're just kind of teetering on that edge of those ligaments, taking over, those other tissues taking over outside of your muscles, outside of your tendons, and eventually that stuff starts breaking down. So in the back, you have a lot of tissues, a lot of fascia, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people can probably relate to this, discs, right? That's where
Yeah,
you get a
or think they
lot
can
of,
relate to discs. Most
or
people don't know
think.
what that is, but yeah,
Sure. Okay. Well,
they've been told that their pain in their back. It's got to be DGD. Has got
right.
to be they slipped something. Has got to be.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right. And that's usually from my clinical
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, I see that a lot. It's just your discs end up doing a lot of the loading, right? Because at least for people that are active, because we
Mm-hmm.
get loose, right?
Yeah,
And that doesn't just mean like, hey, engage your stomach, right? Or brace your core. It doesn't
big
just mean that
breath.
when
Hold it.
yeah, it doesn't just mean that, right? But I think anyway, getting back on like the passive stretching versus active
Yeah.
active mobilization, it is good to do passive stretching. It is
Mm-hmm.
great to do passive stretching. One, because you're gonna decrease fatigue
Mm-hmm.
in your muscles with exercise,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then two, you're gonna allow your joints to get into uh, a further position than you would
Mm-hmm.
actively, because it's always good to have that ability for your joints to have good mobility. Okay.
Kind of more
Uh,
cushion on each end, like where
yeah,
you not like so the danger zone is bigger. Like you have more space until you hit the danger zone as opposed to being here, right?
100%. 100%. Yep.
Word.
Yeah. Yep. And so like, yeah, those are the two biggest things. And even the misnomer about like, why shouldn't passive stretch before I exercise? Because it's going to reduce my power output. Okay. If you're an Olympic athlete about to run in the 100 meter or the 400 meter or the 200 meter dash, yeah, I would probably not have you passively stretch for too long beforehand, because the amount of power reduction is going to be maybe 1%,
Mm-hmm.
2%, maybe. But
Mm-hmm.
for like you, me, and everybody else who's not getting paid to perform like that, go ahead and passive stretch, because it's been shown that it reduces the amount of fatigue, right? The buildup of hydrogen ions in the muscle tissue, which gives you that burn sensation, it reduces that. So the the ROI on it is far greater, right, than the reduction of power output if you're going to be going or running on a 100 meter dash in the Olympics, right?
Yeah. So
Um,
at the highest levels, don't do that shit because you want to squeeze out, you want to bring out the towel for every little bit that you got. But for your
yeah,
average individual, your weekend warriors, your people that just like to go to the gym, look, I mean, you might be in a healthier spot if you did both.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, yep. Yeah.
Mm.
So, and again, that's for performance. So I'm not saying that those Olympic athletes or those high performing athletes don't passively stretch beforehand, right? But it's all going to be in context, because if somebody who's running, a marathon, let's say, yeah, I would probably have them passive stretch
Mm-hmm.
because I want them to last a little bit longer, type deal.
Yeah.
So, and then doing active, right? Active mobility. The number one thing that comes to my mind when we first hopped on and you mentioned snatches, right, was Turkish get ups. For those that don't know what a Turkish get up is, YouTube it, right? Because it would be far
Mm-hmm.
better at showing you than it would be for me kind of explaining it. But you will access all crevices and corners of your shoulder, not only your glenohumeral joint, your shoulder, the ball and socket, but your shoulder blade. You'll access all of that range of motion and challenge it heavily. So like that would be a beautiful example of, okay, instead of just, taking your arm up over your head and stretching it this way, right? The age old tricep and lat stretch. Okay. Instead of just doing that stretch and then trying to go snatch some more, do a Turkish get up and see how you feel before you go and snatch. I guarantee you'll probably feel a lot better warming it up through the Turkish get up, greasing all those crevices versus just doing a passive stretch like that. Both are good.
Yeah.
Both are good, right? But the Turkish get up will really challenge your body to stabilize the weight overhead through
Yeah.
all
Well,
ranges of motion.
it's got to be the same way that doing PVC pass throughs and an active bottom of a squat and like moving like PVC pass throughs standing up and then at different parts actively, right? In an
Yeah.
active squat. Why that does much better than just getting in a prayer stretch for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
like it's a whole lot better. You're flossing is not the right term, but if you think about it, right, you're moving through ranges that you're going to need, that you're about to use, loaded, and you're doing it not with tons of load, but you are doing it in a similar position with hand position and where your elbows are and where your upper back is.
Mm-hmm.
Where when you're just prayer stretch and your hands are behind your head and your elbows are on a bench, you're just sitting. It's the same thing that you're talking about here, but it's just on a bench instead of up in
Yeah.
the air. And so it's interesting that you say that, because it's very much different snatching myself, doing an active warm up before you snatch as opposed to passive. And passive and hitting like, oh, I need to hit triceps, need to, you know, need to passively hold this band to release my traps. So I need to do prayer stretch, or I need to do like cool, but I don't move as well as if I do the active, and I don't move as well with either of them as when I do both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I see, and I was thinking about this, kind of before we hopped on, but warm ups, right? So a lot of times warm ups. I was just in a conventional gym. I think it was called One Life.
Yeah, there's two. There's 74 and 54.
Yep, down where I'm at, and I went there with a buddy, and just kind of seeing, people's routines, and I didn't. There's not a whole lot of what I see, structured warm-ups when I go into a gym like that. You're almost kind of like an outcast if you are doing something that doesn't involve just hopping right into a set or whatnot. Or most of the time, warm-ups involve like, well, if you're in a bench, just do lighter reps on the bench to get warmed up for your heavier sets. You don't even prime, right? Your soft tissues and your joints, like you were saying, actively. So, but even in some CrossFit gyms, if I think I've seen, hey, let's go run 400 meters, come back in, let's do some leg swings, right? Forward and back, side to side. Let's do some, toe touches where you swing your leg up, and reaching out for your hand straight ahead of you. A couple lunges and sit down at the bottom of the squat for like 20 seconds, and I'll be the first one to say that doesn't get me warm. And I don't think I'm that old. I'm 34 years old, right? Maybe I'm going to be 35 here pretty soon, but that doesn't do shit for me. It may have done, I could hop into a workout and when I was 23 and be able to just rip it, right? And get warm during it and be okay. But here I am at 34 being like, well, maybe I should have been a little bit smarter about it back then. And like actually warmed up my tissue, because otherwise here I am. So there's a difference between like getting your temperature up, right? Or just seeing a little bit of increase in your range, right? Like maybe your first leg swing is a little bit tight, but like your 20th one is a little bit better. And actually priming those muscles to be prepared to handle load, such as like if you're gonna go out running, right? Or maybe even sprinting or picking a weight up off the ground, deadlift. I know in CrossFit, there's not a whole lot of movements that are done normally that work to actively flex your knee outside of maybe butt kickers. And I could be, you could provide some insight on there that I see. I'm not saying every single gym, right? But most of the time it's usually just in the warm-up butt kickers. That's about it. So when you're going out to sprint, or when you're going to row, or when you're going to deadlift, or even squat, right? There's a lot of active flexion of the hamstrings that we did not prime. So I have a real problem with that, because that can potentially lead to faulty mechanics, right? Which then can lead to injury. And so I know we're probably being like, well, where do I go from this, right? People are like, well, what do I do? Do I do active or do I do passive? The answer is simply both, right? But understanding the benefit that you're going to get out of both. So both are going to increase blood flow. Both are going to increase your ability to access ranges of motion of your joints. But I would prefer for people, I would say this, keep it simple, right? When you're warming up if you want to pick one, stick to active mobility or active flexibility, right? And again, we mean, so you moving your body. And then post, right? If you're looking for simplicity, post would be more passive, right? You have plenty of blood flow because you just worked out, right? Now is the time where you can access ranges of motion because blood flow is going to bring extra flexibility to your tissues generally. So that's a good time for you to like cool down, work on your breathing, right? Be in a position like James talked about, the prayer stretch where your arms are overhead, those kind of things. So I don't know if you have any input as far as like movements, or if you disagree or agree with that simplicity.
No, I mean, I do agree with that simplicity because I think not everyone has all the hours in the day. A lot of people that are listening to this kind of thing are like, hey, I don't live in the gym. I go to the gym so I
Mhm.
can live better. So I would say definitely active first, passive second, right? Passive after. If you could only do one on each side, I would also say that use your brain a little bit, right? If you're going to be doing some squatting, right? You're going to be doing a decent amount of, if your knees in the middle of what you're doing are going to be going over your toes, it's probably solid for you to warm that up with your body weight before you start working out, right? If I'm squatting, you bet your ass I'm doing Patrick step ups or
Mhm.
Poliquin or one variation of that. You also bet your ass that I'm doing half kneeling knee drives. Bet your ass. Maybe I'm even loading and doing some knees over toes split squats.
Mhm.
Maybe not always, but sometimes if I'm super tight, definitely going to still go there with super lightweight, right? With something on my back, probably the strip bar, right? Um, to put myself in a position where like I'm moving through ranges of motion that I'm going to need, because I can tell you there's a massive difference me trying to squat without doing those things and getting an active warm up, hitting 5 minutes on the bike and then jumping off and doing, Frankenstein's and all kinds of stuff, like cool. But I feel better doing less warm up and moving through the directions that I'm going to be, like doing 90-90 openers and single leg open to closes, right? Single leg 90 open to closes. So, one hip is in that 90-90 position, the other foot is straight out in front, and then you're curling it around and coming into that 90 sitting tall and then releasing back again. Like doing those kind of things gets me far more warm for the specific movements that I'm doing than me doing butt kickers or doing just active regular stuff. So I think that the goal here is, if you only have one option, it's active versus passive. And if you really want to get into the weeds with it, right, look at the things that you're going to be needing and you're going to be using and make sure that you appropriately warm those up, because your mechanics are going to be a whole lot different if your knees are not super tight and your quads are not on fire from the first set that you start. You know, if
Yeah.
your quads are already bussing when you first try to go down, you're feeling tight adductors, abductors, you're feeling like your knees are creaky, your ankles are creaky, you didn't do any ankle opening at all, and you're trying to squat, probably not a great idea. And you can get away with it until your upper 20s. I wouldn't say that that's the right way to do it, though. You can get away with it for sure. Most people can get away with it, but it'll come back to haunt you.
Yeah, yeah, I would say, and this is something that I've been telling a lot of people lately, is like, yeah, you can, people say all the time, well, I'm older, I used to be able to get away with it, right? Getting away with it doesn't mean that you robbed a place and, oh, I didn't get caught, so I'm good,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not your body just gets really good at informing you in real time, quick feedback, whether or not you should be doing something. So like when you're younger, your body's pretty, when I say dumb, okay, understand that you're building quicker highways from your brain to your body.
Mm-hmm.
So faster access. Like if you touch something that's hot on the stove, right? You pull your hand off immediately. Ouch, that's hot. When you're super young, right? You'll learn in the moment, but then probably a little bit later, at some point again, you'll touch it again. Why? Because you just haven't lamented that feedback loop, right? So when you're younger, you know, you you trip and fall, right? Or yeah, James, like you get away with not warming up when you're early 20s. You get away with it. Cool, I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna do it again until you one day you can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you're forced to like have to be like me in 45-minute warm-ups, excuse me, every time you come into the gym.
Mm-hmm.
So your body just gets, as you get older, you just get much better at that quick feedback. Oh, my knee hurts. Well, why does it hurt? Well, your body wants to spend more time getting that joint ready for whatever it is you're going to be asking it to do. So it doesn't mean that like, oh, when I was younger, I was able to get away with this. No, no, no. Your body just got really good at telling you that, hey, dumbass, I've wanted you to do this whole time, but I wasn't able to communicate that to you before.
Yeah, and similar to how you're talking about it, it's not like robbing a bank and getting away with it. It's more like, in my mind, hey, you've got tread on your tires that will give you a warning far before it's time to change them, right? You've got an alignment issue on your car. You can
Mm-hmm.
only tighten it so far. Once you've degraded past a certain point, you can only tighten it so far. It will not come back unless you change it out. And just
Mm-hmm.
like in your body, we don't have the technology today to change that out. Now, at some point we might, but today, right? If you let your alignment on your car get too far, the only way to make it better to where it was when you were getting away with it is to change it out. You don't have the opportunity to do that on your body. So you can't really treat it like tires and alignment on a car. Because if you did, you would be thinking that, oh, we could just put something new in here. Well, there's a point that you're not going to get past once it's gone. And so I think it's important to realize that, like, you didn't rob the bank and get away with it and yeehaw, and you could throw some money in the air. No. You're just setting yourself up down the road to have to pay the piper, because physiologically in the moment, your body was like, okay, we got you. Like, we'll take note of this. You'll feel it later, but we'll let you do this for now, because we don't have to tell you today that this is a problem. So
it's not a critical error. Yeah.
There's no free lunch. There's no free lunch. It will come back around. It will absolutely come back around.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say this. So kind of wrapping it up, for those of you guys that are in the gym and looking to like kind of have a simplistic answer. So yes, do all those other modalities, right? Yoga, passive stretch, all those. James, you'll probably run a list of modalities off the top of your head. But when you're trying to improve, say, lifts in the gym, yeah, active, right? Pre, and then passive post, and just understanding, the difference between the two. So,
yeah, man, I think that covers everything there. I think that you can do it. And if the two of the people that you're watching here can do it, so can you, right? Going to take maybe a little bit of study, right, to understand what works and what doesn't. There's also tons of tools that you can use out there, right? We're not sponsored or affiliated with, ROMWOD, which is now Pliability, or GoWOD Mobility, or Sony Webster stuff, or Juju Mifu's product there for active and passive. Like, we're not affiliated with any of them, but those can take a lot of the thinking out of it for you to start, and then figure out what you like, what you don't like, what kind of construction you like, what kind of time of day you're going to do it. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways you can go. But it starts with you doing a Google search, right? You figuring out where you tight, right? In the lamest terms as possible, right? Oh, my knee hurts. Well, start going down the rabbit hole of what part of your knee actually hurts, right? And kind of go that way. So I don't know. I think that, it's not doomsday. All life is not lost. It's going to be okay. Active before, passive after, and listen to your body a little bit. It'll show you where you need to pay attention. We will catch you later. Peace.